For the Apostle Paul, there was like two groups, walking in the flesh and walking in the spirit, and they were two different groups. Let's talk about it. Most of you have heard that in the Torah there are 613 laws. That may or may not be entirely accurate, but that's kind of like one count. You see, the Torah doesn't address every facet of life, and that's the reason why you have rabbinic law, or the sages. And what they would try to do was they would try to take the instruction or Torah of God and then add commandments for every possible scenario. And the Apostle Paul says, no, don't do that. Yes, follow the text, follow what the instruction was given at Sinai, but in all the nuances, the way that you play it out, you don't need to be looking to the sages. Instead, rely on the Spirit. Yes, do what it says, but rely on the Spirit. And so in the context of Galatia, in the book of Galatians, you had these brand new believers that grew up as Gentiles. They didn't know the Torah. And then you also had the group who had met the Messiah in some way. And when I say that, I meaning they might have accepted Jesus, but they might not have fully understood that they are to walk in the Spirit. So there's this like faction developing. The people who grew up with the Torah definitely wanted to coach the non-Torah people on how to do it exactly right. And the Apostle Paul is coming against all this, saying, you influencers, you guys, rightly so, you want to follow the whole Torah, but you're not wanting to do it in a way that is following the Spirit. The Apostle Paul would say, yes, I too want to follow the Torah. I want to follow God's instruction, but I want to not do it as one who is under Torah. I want to do it as one who is walking in the Spirit. I want to be able to engage it and do it because I want to, and we call this virtue. Virtue, by the way, is doing something because it's like intrinsic inside of you. You're not doing the letter of the law anymore. You're doing it because it's just naturally who you are. And that's part of what the new covenant is that it is God's promise to write his law, his Torah on your heart, that you might naturally want to do those things. Now, at this point, what I want to do is give you an illustration. The illustration is a school zone. The school zone is a place where you have these kids walking around, and in a residential area usually, you're going to have a speed limit sign that says 25 miles an hour. And the reason that you have speed limit 25 is because that is a lot shorter way of saying, hey, could you have a heart? There are little kids walking around here and they want to get home safely to their parents, and this community should be filled with love. And if you understand that your actions have consequences, you might want to drive really, really slow so that you might preserve the life of those children. That's a lot longer than speed limit 25. So hopefully you can see this illustration. When the law is posted speed limit 25, that's good and right, but we're going to see at the end of Galatians, it's going to say, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Did I get them all? I'm not sure. But then it says, against such things there is no law. The reason is there is no law against someone who wants to slow down intuitively so that they might preserve the life of that child. And so I might contend to you that the law is good in different sorts of ways. The speed limit 25 is good for someone who doesn't value life. They're not in the Spirit. They don't have the spirit of making sure those kids get home safely. They just don't really care, and they look up and they see speed limit 25, and maybe they're motivated by not getting a ticket. Now, that isn't the spirit of the law. That is just letter of the law. They're doing it. There's still a benefit, but it isn't the goal. The goal is to get those kids home safely. So you've got knucklehead drivers out there, and that sign is for them. But that really isn't the goal of the law. Now, there's people who are brand new to driving. They are people that actually have a a heart that loves kids. They want life to happen, but they are brand new to driving and they don't know exactly what that might look like. And maybe for some of them, because they're completely inexperienced, they might think that 35 miles an hour is okay. But the truth is that's still too fast. And so the person who has the spirit of wanting to stay safe, be a safe driver, get the kids home safely, they might look up at that sign and say, oh, the law actually reads 25, so I'm going to slow down to 25 miles an hour. But let's just say that the law has been really written on a person's heart, and they understand speed limits. They just it all congeals together, and they're going down the street in that school zone, and they really want to do a good job with their driving so that those kids can get home safely, the community can stay in bliss. They understand there's all kinds of residual effects. If there's no accident with the child, there's no police and sirens causing stress, and the community just is vibing as a whole and is really, really good for everybody. And so I'm 49, almost 50. I so get it. I have both the experience and the desire to keep kids alive. And so when I go through a school zone, I intuitively slow down. And I slow down maybe to 20. I even go past what is required of me. And the thing is when I do that, I don't even need that sign anymore. I might need it in the event that I get in a hurry, I forget or something. I'm always glad that speed limit 25 is up there. But if I do everything right, if I'm in touch with my body and my senses and I value those kids and I'm not in a hurry, if I do that, there is no law, there's no speed limit 25 telling me to do something different than what I'm doing. So in other words, if you are in a situation where you're doing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and you're being led of the Spirit, there is no Torah, there is no law in the Torah that goes against those things. And so that's how it works. So with all that in mind, let me just read the text and go through verse by verse and do it quickly here. Verse 13, for you were called to freedom, brethren. Only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. And so the Apostle Paul is recognizing here the backbiting between the influencers in this congregation, or those that are trying to get people to be halakhically Jewish, to submit to rabbinic Torah, and they shouldn't get all full of themselves in that, nor should the Gentiles coming in that didn't grow up with the Torah get full of themselves that they in fact have the Spirit, but they don't know the law. Whatever group you find yourselves in, you know what? Let's come together, walk in the Spirit together, and then reason together. How do we, by the Spirit, properly, in a community context, properly apply what God has given us in His instruction called the Torah? And so we don't want our freedom to turn into an opportunity for the flesh. What Paul doesn't want people to do is, even though we are free to walk in the Spirit, we don't want to move back into our sinful nature, nor do we want to move back into being under the Torah in the sense that the Torah can condemn us, but also doing letter of the law too. Paul doesn't want that. But through love serve one another. I think that's self-explanatory. Verse 14, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Yeshua does the same thing. Rabbis did this. They tried to condense the law into what if I were to condense it in a way that gave the spirit of the whole law what's it about? And so Yeshua cites the Shema. You need to have this one God, love Him, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so Yeshua brings those two elements together. And Paul would agree with that, but Paul here is dealing with a relational issue in the context of the Galatian church, and there's some backbiting going on. They're devouring one another. And the Apostle Paul says, if I were to condense all of this into an idea for you, brethren, that would be that you need to love, agape, love one another as yourself. Show deference to one another. Give them some space to learn and grow. Whether they grew up with the Torah or didn't grow up with the Torah. If they grew up with the Torah, to learn how to let go of religious Judaism, legal Judaism. And if they didn't grow up with the Torah, give them freedom to learn how to walk in God's instruction. Verse 15, but if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. So he's just doing an indictment there. Like you guys are doing a lot of backbiting. You need to stop it. Verse 16, but I say, walk by the Spirit and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. If you are in Messiah for real, if you are a born again person, you are in the Spirit. Walk in that. Be sensitive to the Spirit's leading. Listen to God. Listen to Yahweh. As you do that, read Yahweh's instruction and interpret that so that you might do it in your community. This is what Jesus is doing, by the way, in the Sermon on the Mount. I think it's relevant here. Jesus is giving a sermon on how to take the letter of the law and analogically or by the Spirit apply it to the totality of life. So you've heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you, even if you tell your brother Raka, so you have the letter of the law, the do not murder, but there's this, by the Spirit, the do not murder should be in all ways to not murder your brother or your sister. It's not just taking a hatchet to their head, it's also about how you treat them with your words. Verse 17, for the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. The Apostle Paul, he covers this at length in Romans. He understands that he's kind of at war with himself. Even though he is born again, walking in the Spirit, he recognizes that there is still this struggle that he might go back into walking in the flesh. And I think it's this is part of the sanctification process. I think it's naive to think that if you are born again, that you no longer have the capacity to walk in the flesh. You do. And that's something, and anyone who wants to tell me any different, all you need to do is go examine your life over the last couple of days and you'll know that you will sometimes tap into the flesh. Hopefully that didn't happen to you, but it's a thing. But the Apostle Paul says no. What we need to be doing moment by moment is walking by the Spirit and not yielding to our flesh in any way. Verse 18, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under law. For the Apostle Paul, being under law usually means two things. Number one is that you are under the condemnation of the law because and the law tells you if you do not have Jesus as your Messiah, you will die. But if you have Jesus as your Messiah and you are now in the Spirit, you will live. You're no longer under the law in that way. But another way is that if you're trying to do the letter of the law, if you are trying to walk in the Torah with the flesh, you are also under the law. Verse 19, now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife. You can go ahead and read the list, but the Apostle Paul is getting at the central idea that you are bearing fruit. A fruit is attached to a branch and a root. And if your root is evil, if your root is of the flesh, it will produce these things, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, and it will play out in how you try to do God's instruction. I know a lot of people trying to do good, but in their good, they are still struggling behind the scenes with pornography and fighting with their spouse and all kinds of stuff. And the thing is that you can't fool God. You can be doing good things externally, giving to the poor, but don't think for a moment that that's what gets you into the kingdom of heaven. It's not. It's whether or not you have believed on Yeshua, that Yeshua might place his Spirit in you, and you are called a child of God because of that. In fact, the Apostle Paul says, those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. There's no law of the flesh. I think that fits here. But I'd say that there is no law. There's nothing in the Torah that is going to go against those things. Verse 24. Now those who belong to Christ Jesus have have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. So that part of you should be dead. The flesh is dead if you're walking with the Messiah. Verse 25, if we live by the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Live and walk. Now, some of you are unfamiliar with the word halakha. It's a Hebrew word that just means your walk. How do you play out? We even do it in Christianity. We say, hey, how's your walk with God? I mean, sometimes it drives people nuts that we would say that, but it's actually a theological thing. If the Spirit of God is in you, fine. Now walk in it. Now do the Torah. If you're just learning, you're going to have to look up at the speed limit sign to see what it says. But over time, like I've learned how to do the Sabbath. I naturally don't eat pork. I just naturally do it because I've been practicing. Now, there's a sense in which I could not eat pork because I'm following the letter of the law, but that's not really what's going on inside of me. I do it because I am led of the Spirit not to do it. It's just like natural for me. It's natural for me to choose life. In the same way, it's natural for me to go through a school zone, and the speed limit is there, and I'm glad for it in case I forget. But the real issue for me is, can I get those kids home to their families so that they can experience the joy of doing family together? Verse 26, let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. Don't get in this dogfight with one another. Whether you grew up with the Torah or you didn't grow up with the Torah, walk in the Spirit and discuss, what does it mean to live out God's instruction in a way that exalts Jesus and makes the kingdom of God happen here on this earth, where life is the norm and death is pushed to the side. It's gone. That's what we should be wanting. I'll see you next week.